Welcome back to Faith Formation at Home. This week's gospel is Jesus' famous parable of the Rich Man and Lazarus. It's interesting, in this story that Jesus makes up, he names the hero after his good friend Lazarus, and the other guy doesn't even get a name. He's just the rich man. Right? It's a longer story, right? The story that you'll hear at Mass is much longer than what's in this Celebrating Sunday for Catholic Families. So similar to last week, you'll probably want to check out the longer form of the reading, either in the Evangelion or online somewhere, or look up the citation in your Bible at home. It's interesting because at the end of the longer version, there's a line that's really important to the story that's missing from this, right? So in the story, there's this rich guy, there's Lazarus, they both die. Lazarus goes to the bosom of Abraham because heaven's not open yet, Jesus hasn't risen from the dead. And the rich man goes to hell. And he's talking to God from his place in the afterlife, and he's like, Lazarus has it good, send him to bring me some water. And God's like, no, he can't do that. All right, so they kind of keep going back and forth like this, and the rich man eventually says, well, send Lazarus to go back and warn my family that they should live better so they don't end up like me. And God has this awesome line at the end. He says, they're not going to believe it even if somebody comes back from the dead. All right, Jesus is kind of calling his shot, right? People may not believe in me even if I rise from the dead. So it's an interesting line there, right? Resurrection from the dead sometimes doesn't convince some of us. And so this is ultimately a story about how do we use our material resources, right? Because this rich man has Lazarus in his house all the time. He never helps him at all. And now all of a sudden in the afterlife, he expects Lazarus to help him out. It's kind of a ridiculous ask on his part, right? So it's playing off of last week's theme, right? You can't serve God and mammon, God and money. What we do with those material resources is important. And so kind of Jesus' not so subtle message here is, if we don't use our material resources well, then it doesn't matter if someone rises from the dead or not. Our hearts aren't ready to receive that message, right? And so it's an interesting challenge for us, again, on top of last week. What do we do with our material resources? What do we do with our money, with our toys, with our maybe immaterial resources like our time and our talents and abilities? How do we use those to further God's kingdom? How do we use those to build up the church and to build up charities and institutions like that? Or do we just keep it all to ourselves? Because the challenge is not to keep it to ourselves.